On a snowy night in April 2009, Denver cops have Sean Johnson on the ground. He's under arrest after being kicked out of this nightclub. His friend, Michael DeHerrera, worries cops are being too rough, so he calls his father, a sheriff's deputy, for advice. Just then, Officer Devin Sparks grabs DeHerrera and slams him to the ground. The officer repeatedly strikes him with a small metal club. DeHerrera blacks out and says he doesn't remember anything until waking up in the hospital with stitches and broken teeth.
I saw nothing that proved excessive force.
Ron Perea is the city official in charge of policing Denver's police. He says the video doesn't tell the whole story, that the camera missed the heavily intoxicated Johnson and DeHerrera shoving police officers.
When you look at it in its entirety and see what occurred, I don't believe the officers acted excessively.
The city allowed the officers to keep their jobs, but Denver's independent police watchdog disagrees. He thinks the officers should be fired. One reason? Officer Sparks' report claims DeHerrera, quote, spun to his left, attempting to strike me with a closed right fist. Richard Rosenthal says the video proves the officer's account is pure fiction.
Writing the report the way it was written, under penalty of perjury, was absolutely inappropriate and should have resulted in the officer's termination. It was clear to me that they were attempting to cover up what actually happened and make it look better than it was.
DeHerrera and Johnson have now settled a lawsuit against the city, and when this video finally came to light, charges against the two men were dropped. Clayton Sandell, ABC News, Denver.
And joining us now exclusively in our studio is Michael DeHerrera, along with his father, Pueblo County Sheriff's Deputy Anthony DeHerrera, and his mother, Denise. Good morning to you all. Thank you very much for being here this morning. And I know this happened in April of last year, and you said a lot of it is blurry, Michael, what had happened. But what do you remember?
Well, I just remember that evening knowing when I saw them on Sean, like, I knew it was too excessive. I knew it wasn't right. So my dad being an officer, I called him for help. I didn't know what to do because I'm not going to get involved with the police, so I just thought that was my best bet, was to call my father.
So you're on the phone, you're talking to your dad, and what is he telling you?
It happened so quickly. I was frantic. I was yelling to the phone that they're beating up Sean, they're beating up Sean. He just said, Michael, slow down, I don't understand. I just said, they're beating up Sean, they're beating up Sean, and by that point I was down.
And Sean is your friend who was there at the club.
Yeah.
And by the club says you all were thrown out, and I have to ask you, were you drinking? What was going on before we saw the tape rolling? What were you doing?
We had been drinking. There was an altercation with Sean and the bouncer. Apparently he used the women's bathroom, and then they asked him to leave. And at some point when they were escorting him out, then I guess it got violent or punches were thrown. And so he decided it was going to end badly, so he tried to remove himself from the situation. And that's when he ran across the street. And
we've reached out to the officers, and both have declined interviews. One officer in particular said that you went after him. Did you punch him? Did you attempt to punch an officer?
No, I would never. I just wouldn't. I have respect for law enforcement, pretty much because of my dad. And that's just not the kind of person I am. So I would never even dream of doing that.
Your dad is a deputy. You're on the phone with him, and the phone didn't hang up immediately, so you were able to hear some of the altercation.
Yes, we heard everything that went on. For 7 minutes we had an open line. And like you said, the first thing we heard was, Dad, they're beating up Sean, they're beating up Sean. And I told him to calm down. I couldn't understand him. And I said, who's beating up Sean? And he said, Dad, they're beating up Sean. And the next thing I heard was, drop the phone, and then some obscenities. And then I heard a thud. So I thought he got hit. And then I started yelling his name in the phone. And I was yelling, Michael, Michael. At that point, my wife got up and got on the other landline phone to hear what was going on. And we just heard a bunch of obscenities in the background. Then the last thing we heard was, we've got to get rid of the phone. They were recording us.
And what did you do after that? Because, of course, you're frantic at this point.
Yes, at that point, we didn't know where he was, what was going on. So I called Denver Police Department because I assumed he was somewhere in Denver. I asked them if they had any reports, officers out with my boy, either at a house party, a bar fight, or something like that, and they said no. So I called other surrounding agencies, and they said no. So I called Denver PD again, and then again they said no. So I was able to find out through some calls that that they did have officers out with him after they denied it like 3 or 4 times. And we were driving to Denver at that point in the middle of a snowstorm. And I was able to talk to Officer Jaramillo by phone, which was one of the officers on scene. And he told me that Sean Johnson was kicked out of a club, and he was getting arrested because he was running away from the cops. And my boy interfered with him, and there was no need for me to come down to Denver because it was okay. He was just going to be cited for interference, and he just had a little road rash on his nose.
And then when you heard that he was in a hospital, you knew
I immediately
he was
knew
more
the cops
serious than this. And it was some time, Denise, before you were able to see your son. What was his condition when you saw him in the hospital?
Oh, nothing could prepare us for what we saw. His head was 3 times the size it normally is. It was lopsided. He had stitches. His teeth were chipped. He was basically covered from head to toe in bruises. His eyes were blackened. His nose was covered in blood. It was nobody should have to. It's hard.
And right now there's a great dispute back in Denver. The police officers were suspended. They have not been fired. There is some calling that they should. Others are saying no, that it was not excessive force. There was a civil lawsuit that you filed. I know that you can't comment specifically on it. We do know it's public record that you did settle for $17,500. But the thought process behind the suit and the settlement, if you could tell us about that, Michael.
The thought process was we initially did the civil suit because we were trying to get some sort of reaction from the DA and from the Denver's police department that excessive force was used. The end goal was for that to be recognized and for hopefully charges be pressed against cops or for them to be fired or some sort of vindication. So initially when we filed the civil suit, the end settlement wasn't about money. It was about making a point and trying to get actions passed against the cops.
And Deputy, was it tough for you to go back to work?
It was very tough for me to put on the uniform again after that.
But your wife said something to you. What did you say to him?
I told him he should put his uniform on with pride because he's one of the good guys.
And there are a lot of good cops.
There are.
And unfortunately, those that are not seem to receive so much attention.
Right.
But it hasn't changed, Michael, your view of police officers?
No, not at all. My dad's a great man, and I've grown up around other great officers. So this incident will not make me anti-cop. It will not make me biased or think cops are bad or good. I've seen spectrums of both sides. It will definitely not ruin my interpretation of cops. Like, I have one of the best ones right here. So,
example of that.
Yeah, it'll never change my mind. These guys were just bad guys, and it won't change my views.
Well, thank you very much for your willingness all to come together and be united here as a family, Deputy. Thank you for your service. We appreciate it all very, very much. And again, the 2 officers involved declined our offer to be interviewed here this morning.